It is 10:15 a.m. on a Thursday. You are standing in aisle 14 of a Home Depot, staring at a bin of half-inch PVC fittings. Your hands are a little dusty. You are wearing a faded green hoodie and a pair of work boots that have seen better days. You are trying to decide if you need 3 fittings or 4 to fix a minor irrigation leak in your backyard. Your phone vibrates in your front pocket. You pull it out. The screen is smudged. The caller ID displays a local area code and the words, JP Morgan Chase, Private Wealth. You do not answer it. You silence the ringer, slide the phone back into your pocket, and pick up 4 PVC fittings. They cost 85 cents each. 3 minutes later, the voicemail notification pings. When you get back to your truck, a completely unremarkable 9-year-old Ford F-150, you connect the phone to the Bluetooth and hit play. The voice that comes through the speakers is exceptionally smooth, highly polished, and dripping with aggressive, professional courtesy. Good morning, the voice says. This is Julian from the Private Client Group. I'm reaching out because I see a significant unallocated cash position in your primary accounts. We would love to have you come into the downtown office this week. I'd love to buy you a steak lunch, sit down with our senior advisory team, and discuss some exclusive strategies we have for our ultra-high net worth partners to optimize that liquidity. Please let me know what day works for you. This is the 4th time Julian has called you this month. Julian does not want to be your friend. Julian does not want to buy you a steak because he likes your personality. Julian is calling because you recently liquidated a portfolio of commercial real estate properties and the wire transfers cleared. You currently have $14.2 million sitting entirely in liquid cash across 2 checking and savings accounts. You haven't redeployed it yet. You are taking your time. You are researching land acquisitions, waiting for a market correction, and simply letting the money breathe. But the banking algorithm does not want the money to breathe. The algorithm has flagged your account with bright red institutional sirens. To the bank, you have crossed the invisible threshold. You are no longer a customer. You are an asset. You delete Julian's voicemail. You put the truck in gear and pull out of the parking lot. As you drive home, you feel a profound, quiet irony settling into your chest. Because you remember this exact bank, with this exact blue octagon logo, from 15 years ago. 15 years ago, you did not have $14 million. You had exactly $112 to your name. It was a Tuesday. You bought a tank of gas to get to work. You bought a coffee. You bought a sandwich on your lunch break. The transactions cleared in the wrong order. The bank intentionally processed the largest charge first, which dropped your balance below zero, and then processed the 2 smaller charges. They hit you with 3 consecutive $35 overdraft fees, $105 in penalties, for a financial miscalculation of less than $10. You called the 1-800 number that night. You sat on the floor of your rented apartment staring at the wall, and you begged the customer service representative to reverse just one of the fees. You explained that you needed to buy groceries on Friday. You explained that it was a timing error. The representative read from a script. They told you the fees were valid. They told you there was nothing they could do. They were cold, bureaucratic, and entirely indifferent to your panic. The bank has not changed. The institution has not suddenly developed a soul. The only thing that has changed is the leverage. 15 years ago, you needed them. Today, they desperately need you. Julian wants to buy you a steak because the banking system operates on fractional reserves and assets under management. Your $14.2 million sitting idle in their ecosystem is a goldmine for them. They use your cash to fund loans, to float institutional bets, to generate immense yield for the bank. But what Julian really wants is to lock you into their private wealth division. He wants to sell you the illusion of exclusivity. If Julian can convince you to let his team manage your wealth, they will charge you a standard management fee. Let's say it is a highly competitive 1%. 1% of $14.2 million is $142,000 a year. Julian wants you to pay him $142,000 a year so he can put your money into a proprietary mix of mutual funds and alternative assets that will, statistically, underperform a standard, low-cost S&P 500 index fund that you could buy yourself on your phone for a fee of 0. But Julian isn't actually selling financial performance. He is selling ego. He is selling the heavy metal debit card that clinks on the table. He is selling the direct phone line to a concierge. He is selling the private office with the mahogany desk and the sparkling water in glass bottles. He is selling the title of ultra-high net worth partner. The entire private banking apparatus is a psychological trap designed for people who got rich and immediately felt the desperate need to be treated like they are rich. You don't want the title. You don't want the heavy metal card. You just want the PVC fittings and the quiet afternoon in your backyard. This creates a bizarre dual reality in your daily life. That night, you go to a dinner with some friends you have known for 20 years. They are good people. They are normal people. They work hard, they complain about their bosses, and they talk about the cost of living. Over beers, the conversation turns to interest rates. One of your friends, Dave, is excitedly explaining a new high-yield savings account he found online that pays 4.2%. He asks you if you've looked into it. You take a sip of your beer, you nod. You say, "Yeah, I've heard the rates are getting better. I should probably look into moving some cash around." You lie. You lie flawlessly, because it is the only way to protect the relationship. If you told Dave the truth, that Julian from Chase is currently harassing you with dinner invitations because you have enough cash sitting in a checking account to buy Dave's entire neighborhood, the friendship would instantly mutate. The dynamic would snap. Dave would stop seeing you as a peer and start seeing you as an anomaly, a resource, or an alien. So you sit there in the dive bar, splitting a plate of nachos, carrying an invisible nuclear secret. The people who have known you your entire life look at you and see a completely average guy in a faded hoodie. They see a guy who drives an old truck and fixes his own sprinklers. But the algorithm at the bank looks at your social security number and sees a whale. These two realities never touch, except when you are forced, by sheer administrative necessity, to bridge the gap. 3 weeks later, you need a cashier's check. You are closing on a 70-acre parcel of timberland in a neighboring county. It is a cash transaction, and the title company requires certified funds for the earnest money deposit. You cannot do this on an app. You have to walk into a physical branch. You pull into the parking lot of a local branch on a Tuesday afternoon. It is an utterly mundane building. You walk through the double glass doors. The air conditioning is freezing. The air smells like carpet cleaner and ozone from the copy machines. There is a line of 3 people ahead of you. You wait quietly. You check your phone. You look exactly like everyone else in the building. When it is your turn, you step up to the plexiglass counter. The teller is a young woman, maybe 23 years old, looking slightly bored. "Hi, how can I help you?" she asks automatically. "I need to withdraw a cashier's check for $40,000, you say. She nods, typing something into her keyboard. "Okay, I just need your debit card and your ID." You hand her your standard blue plastic debit card, the one that comes free in the mail. You hand her your driver's license. She swipes the card through her terminal. You watch her face. You know exactly what is about to happen because it happens every time you interact with the physical banking system now. It takes about 2 seconds for the screen to load. When it does, the boredom vanishes from her eyes instantly. Her posture physically straightens. She blinks, looks closely at the screen, and then looks up at you. Her eyes dart from your scuffed work boots to your plain jeans to the standard blue debit card in her hand, trying to reconcile the visual evidence with the mathematical reality flashing on her monitor. The screen is telling her that the man standing in front of her has $14.2 million in liquid cash available for immediate withdrawal. The protocol kicks in. The bank does not allow a standard teller to handle an account of this size without escalating it to management. It is a retention mechanism. "Just one moment, sir," she says, her voice suddenly an octave higher, stripped of the casual tone she used 10 seconds ago. "I need to get my manager to approve a cashier's check of this size." She stands up and walks quickly to the glass-walled offices in the back of the branch. She taps on a door. She whispers something to a man in a suit. The man looks at his computer screen, his eyes widen slightly, and he immediately stands up, buttoning his suit jacket. He walks out of the office and practically jogs to the teller line. "Mr. Frank," the manager says, extending his hand with a massive, practiced smile. "I'm Richard, the branch manager. It is an absolute pleasure to have you in today. Please, don't wait out here in the line. Come into my office. We can get this taken care of for you, where it's more comfortable." "Can I get you a coffee?" A sparkling water? Every eye in the bank is now on you. The people in line behind you are staring. They are wondering who you are. They are wondering why the guy in the faded hoodie is suddenly getting the red carpet treatment from the guy in the suit. This is what people who chase wealth dream of. This exact moment. The VIP treatment. The immediate deference. The visible proof that they are better, more important, more powerful than the other people in the room. But standing there, you don't feel powerful. You just feel mildly annoyed. No thank you, Richard, you say. Your voice perfectly calm, entirely flat. I'm in a bit of a hurry today. Right here is fine. Richard freezes. He has been trained to coddle this number. He has been trained to offer the mahogany desk and the sparkling water. He doesn't know how to handle an ultra-high net worth individual who rejects the status performance. Oh, Richard says, recovering quickly. Of course, sir. Right away. He stands behind the teller, hovering, making sure she types the numbers perfectly. They print the cashier's check. They place it in a branded, heavy stock envelope. Richard hands it to you with both hands, slightly bowing his head. Is there anything else we can do for you today? Has the private client team reached out to you recently? They have, you say, taking the envelope. Have a good afternoon, Richard. You turn around and walk away from the counter. You walk past the people in line, who immediately look down at their phones as you pass. You walk out the double glass doors, back into the blistering afternoon heat. You get into your 9-year-old truck. You toss the $40,000 cashier's check onto the passenger seat next to the plastic bag containing the PVC fittings. You turn the key. The engine hums. You pull out of the parking lot and merge onto the highway, disappearing instantly into the endless stream of ordinary traffic. This is the absolute pinnacle of financial freedom. It is not the private office. It is not the concierge. It is not the steak dinner with Julian. True wealth is the ability to trigger the institutional alarms of the global financial system. Watch the executives rush out to bow to you, look them in the eye, and say, "No thank you." True wealth is knowing that you can buy the bank, but choosing to just buy the PVC fittings instead. Your phone vibrates in your pocket again. You don't even look at the caller ID. You just let it ring,